The Legend of Sunset Shimmer, Ocarina of Time. By Ganondorf 8. January 7, 2015. Chapter 29, Shimmer Inside of the Dragon's Lair.
I can't believe that she jumped down into that pit,
I cried.
You know you can stop crying, Sunset Shimmer, as Darunia is going to be just fine,
said Spike.
How can you say that?
I asked.
Because of her more bulky frame. Even though she doesn't look like it, Darunia can easily survive a fall from this height, although Gorons don't necessarily enjoy falling great distances. If I know her resourcefulness, she probably found a way to break her fall long before she landed, as I don't think she would have jumped if she didn't have some kind of plan in mind,
replied Spike. We didn't know it at the time, but Pinky had dropped her hammer below in order to use her fingers against the wall as a means of slowing down. She had tough skin, so she could easily make it down without causing them to get burned. As soon as she had made it safely to the ground, Pinky picked up her hammer and started to make her way back through the temple all the way to the bottom level so that she could contain the dragon, who had now woken up.
I hope Sunset Shimmer isn't crying or anything back up there, as surely she knows that I survived that fall just now. I mean, I made it kind of obvious I was going to survive, otherwise I would have given her this boss key I've been carrying around. Luckily, most of my people are saved with 2 left unaccounted for, and I know that she will save them. I just hope that I can keep Volvagia distracted long enough for her to get down to the first floor, and enter its lair with the legendary hammer. I'm amazed though that Sunset didn't figure out that my actions throughout the temple were the result of something much more than she was seeing with her eyes. Maybe she already knows but didn't have the heart to tell me about it. In any case, I need to make a small detour, and I hope she will forgive me.
Pinkie Pie said to herself.
So what do we do now?
I asked.
Now that you have the Megaton Hammer, we need to make our way back down to the lowest level of the Fire Temple, and rescue any remaining Gorons along the way, in addition to getting the boss key. You have the means to destroy the dragon now, but you need the key to enter its lair, which is in the prison cell Darunia's sister is locked in. There is a stone slab located right over there next to the door, and you should be able to use the hammer to knock it down into the room below,
replied Spike.
I was thinking we could follow Darunia down below, I suggested. You don't have her build, so while you wouldn't be killed from such a fall, you would sustain a lot of damage. I know you want to follow her as you're worried about her, but she knew what she was doing when she made that decision. The dragon can't be allowed to escape the temple, and she is giving us the extra time we need to rescue the remaining Gorons, said Spike. Yes, I know you're right, Spike. So we'll make our way down the intended way via that stone slab you mentioned. Do I have to walk all the way back down those stairs to reach it? I asked. This room is circular in shape, and because of that, when you went through that ridiculous obstacle course to claim the Megaton Hammer, you pretty much went all the way around in a complete circle, so the entrance is right down there by merely jumping from this ledge down to the ground, replied Spike. He was right, as the door was down below, and I didn't realize it because I thought that there was nothing but a drop-off after this high point in the room. Jumping down to the floor and walking over to the slab, it looked pretty harmless, but I wanted to step on it just to see if it was loose and not stuck in place. It did lower slightly, indicating that it can be knocked down, so I got off of it and pounded it with the Megaton Hammer, causing it to shake before dropping down, revealing a new passageway. So that's what it feels like to swing around a hammer like a Goron, I said. I'm surprised that you managed to swing it at all given how badly you were using the Master Sword earlier, said Spike. Give me some credit, Spike, as that was my first time using the sword without relying on my transformation, which I'm glad that I avoided. Still, this megaton hammer feels right in my hands as though it had been crafted for me. You know, I wonder if the hero of the Gorons who forged this hammer had me in mind when it came down to the fundamentals of the design? I know that sounds ludicrous because he lived a long time ago, and I'm not even from this world to begin with, but I feel like he wanted me to have this,
I suggested.
Do you honestly believe that?
Asked Spike.
Not at all, but it was fun to think about,
I replied. I then dropped down to the floor below and noticed that the door was blocked by a strange-looking statue which looked exactly like the one I saw back at the entrance to the temple. As I recall, Spike said that nothing was able to destroy the monument, and it was impervious to magic, but I wonder if the megaton hammer was strong enough?
If I were to smash the front of this monument, would it shatter to pieces? Or, should I hit it from the side and see if it works that way?
I tried smashing the front with the hammer only to have it bounce off, so I went to the side and smashed it, which caused the top half of to break away and shrink down to nothing before disappearing.
Since when can a monument do that?
Asked Spike.
I've long since stopped asking questions like that as nothing in this world makes sense,
I replied.
Good point,
said Spike. I then smashed the monument again in order to remove the bottom part and gain access to the door, which I entered after putting the hammer away by placing it next to the master's sword behind the Hylian shield. I honestly have no idea as to how I'm able to store all of these items on my person, but it happens, so I'm not one to question the logic behind it. The next room was quite large, although it ended with a dead end, which made me think where I had to go from here. A strange block was located at the start of the room, which looked as though it could be smashed down with the hammer, and there were also 2 wooden boxes, so there had to be a blue switch nearby. There were also several fire keys flying around along with a torch nearby. As I recall, fire keys lose their flames when they either hit my shield or hit me, but they can regain their fire if they pass through an open flame. I took each of them out with arrows before proceeding to take a closer look at the block.
Should I use the hammer and smash it down?
I asked.
I'd go for it as it seems the most logical choice,
replied Spike. Taking out the megaton hammer, I slammed it down onto the block, which pushed it down, and was followed by the entire floor falling down, revealing various steps which lead down to a door blocked by iron bars with a blue switch in front of it. Walking back to pick up one of the boxes and breaking the other to find some more bombs, I jumped down the large steps towards the door, where I placed the box on the switch, which raised the iron bars, allowing me to enter the door.
Another dead end?
I asked.
There is another block in front of us, so knocking it down will allow us to reach the level below,
replied Spike. Hitting the block with the hammer forced it to drop, and I looked down the new hole in the ground to discover that it was quite the fall I had to take. Without hesitating, I fell down and dropped quite a ways before landing on the block again, which placed me in front of a door which had a rusty switch next to it.
We're back on the 3rd floor again,
I said. That's when I noticed that the fall had put me onto a higher elevation, allowing me to reach the top of the pillar.
I could knock the pillar down to allow us the means of getting to the lair of the dragon, but I think that Goron needs rescuing first. With the megaton hammer, you can smash that switch down to activate it,
said Spike. I did so, which unlocked the door, and I entered it, which led me back into the small room where the Goron was imprisoned. I could hear the cries coming from below me, which meant I was standing on top of the prison cell, and on the other side was another ledge which housed a blue block on it, which was out of place with the rest of the room. Knowing that I had to be up close to move the block with the Song of Time, I leapt over the gap, barely making it in the process, and proceeded to play the song once I took the Ocarina of Time out of my pouch. This caused the blue block to warp down next to the cage, which would allow me to go back the way I came, and a rusty switch was revealed, which must have been hiding under the block. Even if Pinky had tossed me up here earlier during the previous visit to this room, the Goron would have remained trapped due to not having the megaton hammer on hand. I slammed the rusty switch which opened the cell, and the Goron stood up wondering what was going on before getting startled as I dropped from the ceiling in front of him.
Are you releasing me? Am I free to go? Sorry for taking so long to rescue you, as I needed the megaton hammer in order to activate the switch to your cell, I replied. You're in possession of the legendary hammer once wielded by the Goron hero? That tool is a mighty weapon in the hands of the just, and those who are unworthy shall be punished by suffering the curse. Of course, that doesn't apply to you. I'll tell you a secret for saving me. A door is hidden inside the statue at the entrance to this temple. But, the Goron special crop won't work on it. Don't you have anything stronger? Would the megaton hammer suffice?
I asked.
Indeed it would, for it can smash pretty much anything that gets in your way. By my calculations, you should only have one more Goron left to rescue, and that should be the older sister of Big Brother. So only 9 of you were captured?
I asked.
Ganondorf's followers killed many of our brothers, and we were forced to surrender to prevent further bloodshed. They then used us as a means of making Maud surrender to them, for she would have defeated our abductors. While many were lost as a result of the king's hatred of us, we shall endure, as that is what our big brother Darunia would want us to do. I shall go back to the city to join the others, but please rescue Maud as soon as possible.
The Goron then left the cell and headed to the left, where he exited through the door, and it left me feeling immense rage in my heart, knowing that lives were lost when Ganondorf had his servants capture the Gorons. Then it made me question as to why neither Pinkie Pie or Maud Pie brought this up with me, seeing as I was the sworn brother of the Goron chieftain.
I'm confused, I began. You look fine to me, said Spike. That Goron mentioned many of his tribe were killed when Ganondorf's followers came to Goron City, yet why wasn't I told about this earlier? Surely Darunia and or Maud would have said something, considering I am a sworn brother to Darunia,
I said.
Some things the Gorons prefer to keep to themselves in order to restrict the guilt, and not have anyone else have to suffer along with them. Darunia and Maud may have been aware that you lose control of yourself whenever you allow your emotions to consume you, or they just didn't want you to feel miserable about something which doesn't affect you. They see you as the hope that they have been wanting for a long time now, and to see you broken would cause the Gorons to feel the same way. They look up to you now as you are a hero to them, and you need to maintain that presence no matter how difficult things get, said Spike. Still, I should have been told, I said. You'll get your chance to know the truth once we rescue Maud. Pick up that remaining small key in the treasure chest, and go back into the previous room so that we can do something about that pillar, said Spike. This was the 8th key I've picked up, and with it in hand I went back to the other room where the top of the giant pillar was located. All you need to do here is to smash the megaton hammer down onto the pillar, which will cause it to drop all the way back down to the first floor. And how do we make our way back down to that level? I asked. We can just fall down the resulting hole in the ground to get there faster than going the long way, replied Spike. Wouldn't such a fall hurt me? I asked. Only if you decide to smash the pillar and follow it when it falls through, or you can stand on top of it and then smash it, which will allow us to fall along with it, which should actually be the safest course of action. Either way, we need to get down to the start of the temple as fast as possible if we hope to help Darunia. By my calculation, she should have confronted the dragon by now, so now we're literally on borrowed time,"
replied Spike. I decided to stand on top of the pillar before slamming the megaton hammer down onto it as hard as I could. The pillar shook for a few moments before suddenly dropping straight down to the first floor, which caused my heart to beat extremely rapidly, and for my life to flash before my eyes as I actually thought I was going to die when the pillar would eventually crash into the lava below. The pillar landed in the lava with enough of it sticking up to make for a platform across to the boss door, yet all I could think about at that moment was trying to get my heartbeat back to normal, as that was an intense rush which really took a lot out of me.
"I never want to have to do that again either,"
I breathed heavily.
"This temple has really made you dislike how things work in here,"
said Spike.
"Only the Gorons would build a temple to these kinds of specifications. I'm glad that we got down here as fast as possible, but my heart certainly didn't like the fall, and I almost threw up because of the speed with which I was falling. Just give me a couple of minutes to regain my bearings,"
I said. Saying that, I fell onto my back and looked up at the giant hole in the ceiling where the pillar once was, and as sweat dripped down my brow amidst my heavy breathing, I began to think about Pinkie Pie. The visions going through my head were of pure torment as I saw her being utterly destroyed by Volvagia's fiery breath, and she was giving it her very all to prevent it from escaping the temple. After seeing enough anguish, I immediately sat up and wiped the sweat off of my face before getting back onto my feet.
"Where do we go from here, Spike? Without the Boss King, we can't unlock the door and take on Volvagia, so we need to head back to the entrance room of the temple, and destroy that monument which is currently blocking the only door we haven't tried. I have this feeling that we still have a few more challenges to overcome before we can rescue Maud,"
replied Spike.
"I wonder if Darunia went to see her before heading into the dragon's lair, because I'd think she would want to get some kind of encouragement from her sister before meeting her destiny head-on,"
I said. Now that I was back to normal, I jumped over to the platform where the smaller door was, and entered it to return to the entrance of the fire temple, and immediately walked down the stairs and to the left where the monument had been standing ever since we first arrived. Upon a closer inspection, the door behind the monument was locked, so if I had chosen to ignore the previous Goron or forgotten about the key, we would have been stuck and forced to go all the way back up to the third floor again. Luckily, I had everything I needed, so I smashed the monument with the hammer until it was no more, and just for fun I decided to swing it around a few times.
"How is it you can use the megaton hammer like it was nothing, and yet you have trouble using the Master Sword?"
asked Spike.
"Because it was made for me in mind,"
I asked sheepishly.
"That's a pretty poor argument and you know it,"
replied Spike.
"Maybe it has to do with the Master Sword being a sharp blade as opposed to the megaton hammer which just has a dull face on the end. Maybe I'm just afraid that I'll accidentally stab someone with the sword due to how sharp it is. Then again, I did see how much fun Darunia was having with her hammer, so perhaps I picked up on some of her mannerisms,"
I suggested.
"The first reason makes no sense at all, so I'm not buying it, but the second reason does seem pretty valid. The third reason seems to be the most plausible because you were watching Darunia's every move, and her examples of sword techniques did involve the use of her hammer. Suffice to say, her techniques did work on you, Sunset Shimmer, but the intended target was ignored in favor of a more basic weapon, if you know what I mean,"
said Spike.
So what should I do?
I asked.
Keep working on learning how to use the Master Sword, as it will be used a lot more than the Megaton Hammer, which I see being only used in a few key situations once we have finished here in the Fire Temple,
replied Spike. Even though I wanted to argue against that notion, Spike was right, as I needed to improve my skills with the sword, since deep down I knew that I would need to rely on it more than ever before as the trials continue to increase in difficulty. Taking out the final small key of the temple, I unlocked the door and opened it to reveal a room which had one torch in the middle of it with a number of torch slugs and fire keys near it. The door on the far end of the room was blocked with iron bars, leaving me with few options to rely on.
How do I open that door? I don't see any switch that can be activated,
I said.
This is one of the kinds of rooms in a dungeon where the door doesn't open until you've defeated all of the monsters in the room. Besides, you've been through these rooms already whenever we had to fight a strong opponent, so I don't know why you decided to ask me something you already know the answer to. By the way, you can use the Megaton Hammer to flip over the torch slugs, rendering them helpless?
Asked Spike.
I think you mentioned that to me when we encountered them for the first time,
I replied.
Yes, but that was before you picked up the hammer,
said Spike.
So now I can put that strategy to the test, but first I need to take care of the fire keys,
I said. Taking out the fairy bow, I aimed at the fire keys, but I had to wait for a while before I could shoot at them because I wanted them to stop moving, because my aim was still pretty poor despite having used it for a while now. Eventually, they came to a stop by landing on the ground, which allowed me to pick them off one by one until only the torch slugs were left. Putting the bow away and taking out the Megaton Hammer, I slammed it into the ground, which did nothing to the monsters, so I moved closer in order to flip them over and put out their flames at the same time. Once I was close enough to them, I slammed the hammer into the ground, which caused the torch slugs to leap into the air before landing on their backs and unable to move.
You can continue to pound them with the hammer if you want to defeat them that way, although you will be flipping them back and forth between their normal form and their extinguished form. I do know that it takes more hits to defeat them with the hammer as opposed to the sword, but I know that you'll stick with the hammer as that appears to be within your realm of comfort,
said Spike.
Would arrows work on them?
I asked.
They are vulnerable to arrows, but remember that you can only carry around 30 of them at a time, and not all monsters, chests, and jars will be able to resupply you with ammunition, so you would be better off to use the hammer up close without wasting arrows,
replied Spike. Once again, he made a valid point, so I resorted to smashing the torch slugs over and over in order to defeat them. In a way, it did feel like I was going overboard, what with the constant pounding without giving them a chance to do anything, but I figured such a tactic would prevent them from damaging me, and that I would be taking heavy damage once I reached the dragon's lair. Eventually, the torch slugs were no more, which unlocked the door at the far end of the room, which I walked over to and opened, and on the other side was a monster which I didn't want to see because of how disgusting it looked when I saw it last time.
Guess you were right when you said that I would run into another one,
I sighed.
Likes are not exclusive to the Fire Temple, as they are bound to show up in other areas, but only in dark places, as they cannot handle anywhere bright. Remember to keep your distance from them, otherwise it will steal your shield and tunic if it manages to catch you within its gaping maw. One thing you should note with like is that when it stretches out its mouth in order to try to eat you, if you try and attack it, any blows will just bounce off of it like you were hitting some kind of shield. I'm not sure how they are able to perform this unusual defense mechanism, but it does add to the overall frustration,
said Spike.
I suppose this would be a good candidate for shooting arrows at it?
I asked.
Ranged attacks are the way to go because you want to avoid that mouth at all costs. Wait until it retracts its mouth back before firing any arrows, otherwise they'll have no effect and you'll have wasted a good arrow. Like wall masters, when a like is defeated, it tends to leave behind a lot of rupees, so they do make for a good source of income. However, they are more of a risk compared to wall masters because of eating your equipment,
replied Spike. The like simply paced about back and forth with its very movements, freaking me out to no end because it was just so unnatural, but I had to get rid of it because it was blocking the door I needed to open to proceed. Just as I put the megaton hammer away, and took out the fairy bow again, something came out of nowhere and hit me pretty hard on the shoulder, which caused me to drop the bow onto the floor.
What was that?
I asked.
What was what?
Asked Spike.
Something hard just hit me out of nowhere,
I replied before the same thing happened again, this time hitting me in the chest, which really hurt.
Hey! Since when do tiles on the floor suddenly spring up and decide to launch themselves at me? Like you said before, this world just doesn't make sense, but I do happen to know why this is happening. This is an example of what is known as a floor trap, where the tiles will pop out of the ground before coming at you in a kamikaze style of attack. You can't stop them from coming at you because there is a powerful force at work, but you can either use your shield and deflect the tiles, or shatter them to pieces with a melee weapon. Otherwise, you can just dodge them as they can only come at you in one direction, as this is a basic spell at best,
replied Spike.
As always, your smugness becomes you, but I do like the idea of using my shield to protect myself, and it does give me a reason to want to start using it again. Since I can hold the fairy bow in one hand and the Hylian shield in the other, I can block the tiles and shoot at the like whenever I have a free moment. How many tiles do you think will come flying at me?
I asked.
I'd say about 5 or 6,
replied Spike.
Then I have my battle plan for this situation,
I said as I quickly took out the Hylian shield, and placed it in front of me just as a tile came my way, shattering to pieces upon impact. A few more tiles then came out of the ground and flew at me, yet each one shattered against my shield, falling to pieces on the floor. Then there was a brief break in the tiles which allowed me to fire an arrow at the like damaging it, although it looked as though the arrow didn't even phase it despite it being a hit. I didn't have time to figure this all out as the tiles resumed their flying at me, so I went back on the defensive until the last tile came at me. Once that obstacle was out of the way, I fired one more arrow at like which defeated it and caused it to deflate before shriveling up, which was really disgusting, but it did drop a number of blue rupees, which is what Spike said would happen, so I pocketed all of the rupees before opening the door and entering the next room.
Have we been here before?
Asked Spike.
What do you mean?
I asked before I realized that we were in the same room where I battled with the flare dancer, yet this room was smaller in size, and the platform in the middle was smaller than the other one was. Sure enough, there was a circle of fire on top of the platform, which meant that I was about to deal with another flare dance at any moment, and I wasn't looking forward to that, seeing as the last one gave me a lot of trouble.
Oh great! We have to fight another one of those fiery dancers, and this time we have to do so in order to save Maud, who should be in the next room. This fight may be a little more difficult due to the size of this room being smaller than the last one, so maneuvering is going to be an issue for you, said Spike. I still have a good number of bombs on hand, so it's not like I'm going to run out anytime soon, I said. You know, I was thinking that maybe this time you can try using the megaton hammer against Flare Dancer in order to remove its flaming clothes. The fire that surrounds it doesn't appear to be very bulky, but rather fragile, and your hammer certainly knows how to deal with anything that's delicate. The hammer can also be used as an offensive weapon, as I mentioned to you when you first acquired it, but remember that it doesn't have the swiftness of the Master's sword,
said Spike. As soon as I took out the megaton hammer, the laughter of Flare Dancer filled the air as it leapt out of the fire before starting to spin around just like before. As soon as it was done spinning, it began to skate around where it did manage to knock me down as I wasn't ready for it, but I quickly got back up and waited for the right moment to strike down with the hammer. That's when I felt a burning sensation and realized that the fireballs it spewed out were damaging me, so I rolled out of the way before being knocked back by Flare Dancer, who collided with me again before it suddenly came to a stop just a short distance away.
So far, it's going exactly like last time,
I moaned.
The megaton hammer has quite a range when you strike it down onto any kind of surface,
said Spike.
Care to explain that one?
I asked.
When the hammer comes down, it causes a small vibration which can catch light creatures off guard. If you were to strike the hammer on the ground anywhere in this room, the resulting impact should cause the flames to extinguish on Flare Dancer, making it easier to deal with. You just need to be fast enough to prevent it from summoning either of its two fireball attacks,
replied Spike.
If I were to say, smash the ground right now, it would give off the desired result?
I asked as I swung the megaton hammer down where it made a loud thud upon hitting the ground, and sure enough Flare Dancer's flames disappeared even though it was on the other side of the room. Spike folded his arms and gave me a smug expression while I responded with a sheepish grin on my face followed by some blushing on my cheeks.
Well, color me red and call me utterly embarrassed for not taking you seriously since you're my partner, and your knowledge pretty much has been saving my butt.
I knew that I wouldn't have enough time to strike Flare Dancer to cause its flames to change color, so I decided to stand there and wait for it to finish running around. Once it came to a stop and jumped into the circle of flame, it regained its flaming clothes and leapt back out on the other side of the room where I had to hustle on over to stop it from spewing out more fireballs.
Why not try that jump attack Darunia mentioned before she left?
Asked Spike.
You think it will work?
I asked.
Such an attack does inflict double damage and it works with any kind of weapon which can be used in a melee, so either the Master Sword or the Megaton Hammer will prove to be very effective. The only drawback is that you will slow down while performing the attack, and there is a couple of seconds where you will be vulnerable after the strike, so use it when you know that you won't be attacked yourself,
replied Spike. Flare Dancer started to spin around, and I wasn't about to let it do as it wished, so I slammed the hammer into the ground which extinguished its clothes, and I immediately tried out this jump attack technique where I jumped forward raising the hammer behind my back before thrusting it down with as much force as I could on top of Flare Dancer. The damage it received knocked it into a wall, but I had to wait a moment before I could pick myself up and resume the attack.
I felt that slowdown you mentioned when I was in the air for that brief moment, but the power that came from the swing was just incredible. Granted, I didn't want it to go flying into the wall on the other side of the room, so it looks like I need to practice this technique as well. Not to mention get used to the impact of the hit as my arms and legs were shaking pretty hard when I slammed the hammer down. I can still feel my teeth chattering away, but I'm lucky that I didn't drop the hammer,
I said.
Everything gets better with practice even when using the Master Sword,
said Spike.
The jury is still out on that one,
I said as I resumed attacking Flare Dancer with the hammer, which was a lot harder than the sword even though I was more comfortable using it than the blade. Spike was right about me having to get better with the sword as it will end up being used more often than the hammer, so I need to find some way to get over my apprehension towards using a sword. Was I just afraid of using something so simple? Could the fears of my transformation making me lose myself have fueled my reluctance of wielding the Master Sword? Or maybe I was being immature about all of it and allowing my own insecurities to get the best of me. Pinkie Pie went out of her way to teach me how to use a sword, and I have to respond to her generous nature in kind by using it, but first I have to resolve my inner problem before anything can be done. Perhaps I could ask Sheik to give me some guidance, or maybe a dojo, seeing as she is a great fairy in this world.
Sunset Shimmer?
Asked Spike.
What is it?
I asked.
Maybe you should focus on the fight at hand instead of daydreaming like you've been doing for the past couple of minutes, because in case you haven't felt it by now, your body is being damaged by blue fireballs which Flare Dancer summoned, all because you suddenly stopped. Granted, you did change the color of its flames, but did you have to just stare off and allow yourself to get burned like that?
Asked Spike.
There were some things I needed to reflect upon,
I replied.
Oh? Like what?
Asked Spike.
What you said about me needing to use the Master Sword as we proceed through this journey. I need to resolve something deep inside of my heart before I can truly use it, rather than how I've been using it throughout the Fire Temple,
I replied.
But?
Asked Spike.
I will use the Master Sword just like you want me to, but until I am able to overcome this problem I have with it, I'll only continue to struggle with it, even though I managed to use it properly in the end against the first Flare Dancer, and against both Ganondorf and Phantom Ganon with some unfortunate help from my transformation. Speaking of Flare Dancer, do you mind if I halt this little conversation until I've taken care of it, or until we've finished in this temple, seeing as we do have a dragon waiting for us?
I replied. That's when I looked down and saw that I was indeed on fire due to the blue fireballs, so I quickly snapped myself back to the focus at hand, and slammed the Megaton hammer down, making Flare Dancer vulnerable again. I had to admit that this was a much easier encounter than the other one, because the hammer proved to be extremely effective. It only took me about a few more minutes to finally defeat the creature before it exploded, which I made sure to avoid this time, unlike what happened before where I almost got blown up. Once the doors unlocked and the circle of fire disappeared, a small chest appeared on the platform where I walked over to it and kicked it open to reveal some bombs.
Now that's what I call rather anticlimactic,
commented Spike.
As well as disappointing, as I was actually expecting something else to be inside of this chest. Don't get me wrong, getting bombs is good, because I have stated several times that I needed to stock up on them because of running low, but my heart was hoping for something better than this, considering what I defeated. I guess sometimes you have to deal with getting lousy rewards from powerful opponents,
I said.
It's all a part of the life of being an adventurer,
said Spike.
The only good thing about all of this is that we can finally free Maud from her prison cell and secure the boss key. No doubt she's been waiting for what feels like forever to be rescued, even though it's probably been about a couple of hours,
I said. Opening the door to the south led me back to the room where Maud was locked up, and she was still standing there with her usual expressionless face, because that's the kind of person she was. She did have her arms folded though, and I noticed that she was mumbling something under her breath, which had me wondering what she was thinking about. I used the Megaton hammer to activate the rusty switch Maud told me about way back at the beginning of exploring the temple, and the prison cell opened on both sides, which did startle her a little, as she didn't realize I had entered the room.
I knew you would come and rescue me,
said Maud.
If I have my calculations correct, you're the last Goron to be rescued,
I said.
That is correct, Sunset Shimmer. 9 of us were captured by Ganondorf's followers while the rest were either killed or managed to avoid being captured,"
said Maud.
"You reminded me of something I needed to speak to you about,"
I said.
"What is it?"
asked Maud.
"The previous Goron I rescued mentioned that a number of you were killed when you were brought here to the temple, yet why didn't you and your sister explain that to me when we found you back at the start? I know that I'm not a Goron and for that such information may not be allowed to be told to an outsider, but wasn't I made a sworn brother by Darunia? Would that distinction allow me to have learned the truth about what happened to your people?"
I asked.
"We don't allow outsiders to know of our more private affairs, but what you speak of is true because as a fellow brother to us, you were allowed to know what was happening. The reason that Darunia and I didn't want to tell you was because we feared that you would have gone and done something reckless,"
replied Maud. Hearing her say that made me think that Spike was right about my emotions being too unstable to have been told, but that didn't make sense now as I never once told Pinkie Pie that I was experiencing emotional issues. In fact, I didn't even know that I had such problems until I encountered Ganondorf. Something else was going on here, and I aimed to get to the bottom of it. Maud had been talking the entire time I was thinking, but luckily she hadn't noticed that I wasn't paying attention to her.
"We can't risk the safety of our fellow outsiders' sworn brothers because they would have gone to great extremes in order to ensure that our people would be avenged. And that is where I have to stop you,"
I said.
"What do you mean?"
asked Maud.
"Originally, I believed that you kept the truth from me because it had something to do with my emotions, but as soon as you mentioned other brothers who aren't Gorons, I realized that you haven't been honest with me.
I only know of 2 non-Gorons who are sworn brothers to the tribe and in particular with Darunia, the former king, and myself.
This whole keeping the secret of your fellow Gorons' deaths doesn't have to do with those on the outside. It has to do with your sister because the loss of her brothers drove her to the point of sheer madness, didn't it? Her anger was kept under control these past 7 years, but when she learned that Ganondorf's followers killed her people, she became so enraged, her rational means shut down, which explains why she was being so reckless in the temple,"
I replied.
"Was it really that easy to figure out?"
asked Maud.
"My partner Spike and I did notice that Darunia was acting foolish from time to time, but we shrugged it off saying that she was just being herself, and wanting to prove she still had the heart for adventures. Now I see why she acted like that and put on such a facade in the process. She didn't want anyone other than you to know that she was having anger issues, and she desired to take on the ancient enemy of the Gorons as a means of taking out her frustration on the beast which Ganondorf revived,"
I replied.
"Darunia came here to see before going to the dragon's lair,"
said Maud.
"I figured she would, seeing as she didn't want to leave you,"
I said.
"It wasn't just about that. She wanted to talk to me and said that she was going to deal with the dragon despite not having the legendary hammer, and she asked me to promise not to tell you what was really going on as she was afraid that you would get yourself killed trying to stop her from doing the same thing. Since you figured it out on your own, I didn't break my promise to her,"
said Maud.
"Not really the point, is it?"
I asked.
"No, it isn't,"
replied Maud.
"I intend on rescuing your sister and defeating the dragon as I have the Megaton Hammer, which is what your ancestor used to destroy it originally. Darunia may have anger issues because of what Ganondorf and his followers have done to her, but she is still the greatest thing to have ever impacted your life and those of your people. I am upset that you two decided to keep that little secret from me, but you should have known me better than that. I'm not the kind of person who would jump into a situation without thinking unless I was under intense emotional stress, for I prefer to keep safe until I can assess things before acting on my gut instinct," I said. "Heh. You would have made for a fantastic Goron chieftain in another life," smiled Maud. "I'm just speaking from the heart," I said. "Then you know what you must do, my brother, and that is to rescue my sister from herself and from the dragon. She entered its lair about half an hour ago, so I am hoping that you can get to her in time before it's too late. Take the key inside of this chest and use it to open the door which leads to the dragon's lair. Make sure you keep that Goron tunic on at all times, as the lair is an intense inferno due to the fiery nature of the dragon," said Maud. "What do you mean by fiery nature?" I asked. "You'll find out for yourself when you encounter the dragon with your own eyes. I'll return to Goron City in order to take care of the others and my niece, but please make sure that my sister is safe. Oh, and I am so very sorry for having deceived you," replied Maud. She then turned around and walked towards the door with her head held low, and when she was opening it, I could see the tears trickling down her face. She must have felt really bad for having not told me of Pinky's problem, and for allowing her to go into the dragon's lair without any means of winning. I opened the gold and blue ornate chest which contained the boss key, and with it I used the same door Maud used and found myself back in the main entrance of the temple. Maud had already left for home, and I knew where I had to go, even though deep down I was scared out of my wits. Making my way back to where I first met Pinky in here, I leapt across using the pillar which now served as a platform before making it over to the door. "Are you ready for this?"
asked Spike.
"Not really, as the thought of me going up against a dragon feels like I'm a small speck compared to the majestic nature of the beast," I replied. "You have the weapon necessary to destroy it, and you do have me to help you out as always. You'll be fine if you keep your wits about you, and don't end up losing control of your emotions, resulting in your transformation to that half-human and half-pony form," said Spike. My wits were the least of my worries when compared to my transformation through equestrian magic, but I couldn't allow that to get in the way of helping Pinkie Pie, so I unlocked the boss door and entered the lair of the dragon when it suddenly spiked up in temperature as though I had just set foot into a volcano at its very heart. "It feels like a sauna in here," I commented. "The dragon must really enjoy the heat if its lair is this intense. So long as you wear the Goron tunic, this heat won't affect you and you won't end up burning to a cinder as a result. Still, I agree that this room is very hot, which is why I'm glad that I'm a fairy and thus immune to the heat," said Spike. "How could Darunia have endured in a room like this?" I asked. "Gorons are resilient to the heat, so this place would be nothing to the likes of Darunia, but I notice that she isn't anywhere to be seen. Maud did say that she came in here not too long ago, and we know that she had her own boss key and was determined to keep the dragon at bay until we arrived. You don't suppose that she has fallen to the dragon, do you? I can't imagine that being the case, but we do have to consider it as a possibility," replied Spike. I refused to believe that Pinkie Pie had been killed trying to contain the dragon and prevent it from escaping, but the fact that she was nowhere to be found does make it seem like that's what happened. No, I have to believe that she is alive somewhere, and that she is waiting for me to save her. There was a large platform in the middle of the room that featured 9 small lava pits, and a platform was in front of it, which must be what I need to use to make it over there. "That main platform reminds me of a game back in the human world," I said. "What kind of game?"
asked Spike.
It was called Whack-a-Mole, where the objective was to hit a mole whenever it popped its head out of a hole which you would hit with a hammer. I have one of those in my possession, and that platform has 9 holes, which is the standard number of holes needed for the game. Don't tell me that I have to play a life-sized version of Whack-a-Mole against this dragon? Well, you can't tell me anything as you've never heard of the game before,
I replied.
Duly noted,
sighed Spike.
Might as well get this started,
I sighed as I made my way over to the main platform. As soon as I reached the middle lava pit, the entire room suddenly flared up and the intensity of the lava began to make itself known. The other platform then sank down into the lava, which meant that I was stuck here until this was finished, and then something was vibrating from the lava pit in the middle before fire starting to spew forth from it. The vibrations continued to grow in strength, and then I saw it with my own eyes emerging from the lava pit. The dragon known as Volvagia emerged and flew straight into the air before turning around and breathing a huge burst of flame before entering the same lava pit as before, leaving me to wonder about what I had just seen.
Spike? That was the dragon. But it doesn't look like what I was expecting. If you were expecting something along the lines of King Dodongo, then you just got disappointed, seeing as the dragon is a lot smaller in size, but don't you underestimate it just because it's smaller than your average dragon. That creature has a lot of power inside of it, so you need to be careful not to end up losing your focus due to not being able to take it seriously,
said Spike. Suddenly, the furthest lava pit from the center began to flare up, and Volvagia emerged from it, where it used its fiery mane as a whip. I ran towards it knowing that the megaton hammer was needed, but the instant I got within range of it, it opened its mouth and breathed out a huge burst of flame which burned me so badly that I stumbled about for a moment before falling down onto my face. Volvagia then dipped back down into the pit, leaving me looking pretty foolish, not to mention horribly injured from its flame.
That fire from its mouth was intense,
I said as I got up and brushed myself off.
Good thing you're wearing the Goron tunic as well as having your own natural resistance to fire, otherwise that blast would have burned you alive. I noticed that the dragon was waiting for a moment before it decided to attack, so perhaps you can use that to your advantage, provided you can get over to it before it breathes its flames, and respond with the hammer,
suggested Spike. The lava pit to my right flared up and Volvagia came forth and its mane struck me on the shoulder, but it didn't hurt all that much as I was only nicked by the tail end of it. However, I was then slashed in the chest by its claws, which wasn't what I was expecting, as I thought it would use its fire breath on me, so perhaps I was too close and it went with something a little more melee-oriented.
It used its claws that time,
I said as I winced with pain.
Volvagia will alternate between its claws and flames depending on where you are when it pops out from the ground,
said Spike.
What do you know about this thing?
I asked.
This is Volvagia, the subterranean lava dragon. It's the boss of the fire temple revived by the evil king. I don't know its weak point,
replied Spike. Wait, what? He doesn't know where I'm supposed to strike with the hammer? You've got to be kidding me here. Then again, Volvagia is an ancient dragon that existed a long time ago, so its vulnerable spot could have been lost over the ages, but still this doesn't bode well unless I can figure it out myself before I get roasted.
Sorry for not being of any help there, Sunset Shimmer, but I have no knowledge when it comes to how this dragon operates, so this is something you will need to figure out on your own. Once you do, I should be able to get a better understanding as to what you need to do. I think I have a pretty good idea,
I said as I readied the megaton hammer and waited for Volvagia to come up again, and sure enough the central lava pit flared up, and I was quite close to it, so I ran over to it just as Volvagia popped up and hit me with its mane again, which did more damage because it hit me with the full force of it. I had to stay strong, which is when I smashed the hammer on its nose, which caused it to rear back for a moment before crashing to the ground. I chose to smash its nose with the hammer again, and it quickly rose up in pain before it sunk back down into the lava pit.
Just as I thought. What did you do to it?
Asked Spike.
This whole thing is like a giant game of whack-a-mole, but in this case this is whack-a-Volvagia with the dragon serving as the mole. By hitting it on the nose just before it attacks, it causes it to get stunned, and from there I can hit it again with the hammer, damaging it in the process.
I replied. Volvagia then emerged from the lava pit closest to the door, where it came right out and started to fly around before it breathed fire on me, which I couldn't avoid, so I ended up getting burned quite badly. I tried to get some distance from it, but the dragon roasted me a second time before it attempted to strike for a third time, yet I managed to get out of the way as it continued to fly around before it went back down into the central lava pit, leaving me looking pretty charred from the flames.
I wasn't expecting that to happen, given the mole never leaves the holes in the game. Good thing you have that fairy with you, so you can use it when necessary,
said Spike.
What do I do in order to avoid getting roasted when it takes to the sky?
I asked.
Volvagia will attempt to scorch you with its fiery breath, so you just have to watch where it's going and avoiding the flames. Also, don't make contact with it directly, as its body is also made of flames, and it will sometimes try to confuse you and make you run into it. If you are able to, you can shoot it with an arrow which will stop its assault, but know that arrows only distract it and not inflict any actual damage,
replied Spike. The dragon popped up again, 2 lava pits to the left, where it attempted to breath fire on me again, but I got there before that happened and smashed its nose with the hammer and repeated the process when it crashed to the ground. Volvagia then came out from the middle lava pit again, but now it was rising to the ceiling as though it were trying to escape.
What is it doing?
I asked.
It looks like it's trying to make a break for it, but the rock in here is too thick for its fiery body to penetrate,
replied Spike.
So it's just wasting its energy?
I asked.
Not unless you count falling rocks as a means of crushing you without having to do the job itself,
replied Spike. I looked up and my face turned white as a large cluster of boulders came falling down from where Volvagia was rubbing its body against the ceiling. I ran all over the platform, hoping to not get hit by the falling boulders, but a couple of them did manage to hit me, causing me to fall down onto my face, but I had to quickly get back up before any more could fall on top of me. Volvagia then returned to the lava pit as boulders continued to fall until they stopped, and when it looked as though it was about to pop up in front of me, the flaring then jumped over to the farthest pit where it came out, and I had to get over to it. I attempted a jump attack, which I believed was my only option, but Volvagia managed to engulf me in flames, which sent me back quite a ways, and I dropped the hammer, which rolled over to the edge of the platform.
I dropped it!
I exclaimed.
Get it before it falls into the lava!
Shouted Spike.
No need to tell me twice,
I said as I ran towards where the hammer rolled to, but then Volvagia popped up from another lava pit, and since I was right next to it instead of at a distance, it slashed me with its claws, which was enough to kill me. I dropped down to the ground, where I managed to grab the megaton hammer before it fell off the side, but my body stopped moving, which is when the fairy I caught earlier managed to bring me back to life. Once I was back on my feet, Volvagia took to the sky again and began to breathe fire, which I dodged, although I did end up tripping myself due to not watching where I was going, so I was burned by its last bit of fiery breath before it went back down and popped up 2 pits to the right of me. Once again, I smashed its nose with the hammer and followed up with another smash where it went back down before coming back up and heading upwards towards the ceiling.
"Here's an idea,"
began Spike.
"What is it?"
I asked.
"The side of this platform is like climbing up vines, so you can hang on the side and those boulders will never touch you,"
replied Spike. While it did sound a little dangerous to be hanging over a pool of lava, I was desperate to try anything, so I climbed down the platform and waited there until Volvagia went back into a pit. As soon as I climbed back up, the flares from the lava pits popped up in 2 locations before jumping to a third where the dragon emerged, which was right in front of me. Because of that, I got hit not only by its fiery mane, but also its body, which felt like being burned from the inside out. Before it could do anything else, I swung the megaton hammer and smashed its nose where it fell down to the ground, and I smashed it again where I started to think that this was getting ridiculous as it refused to give up. Volvagia then came out of the ground yet again and followed me, breathing fire every few seconds as it tried to roast me, but I managed to focus on where I was going and eventually it gave up and went back down where the flares were jumping all over the place.
"Why does it keep doing that?"
I asked.
"The dragon has taken a lot of damage now, and is trying to use trickery in order to confuse you. I'd say that one more hit with the hammer is going to finish the job, so wait for the moment it pops up, otherwise it will get the surprise on you,"
replied Spike. What felt like an eternity waiting for the dragon to emerge was actually about 5 seconds as it came out from the central lava pit, and slashed me with its claws due to not being fast enough. Before it could sink back down, I smashed its nose one more time before hitting it again when it crashed to the ground in a heap. When I hit it this time, however, it reared up, clutching its nose in pain before dropping down and slowly slinking into the lava pit as though it had finally given up.
"I think it's over,"
I said.
"Hard to say for sure, as it could come back out with new life,"
said Spike.
"Guess all we can do is wait,"
I said. A few moments later, Volvagia came out of the middle lava pit and started to make its way towards the ceiling, where it was screaming in agony all the while moving its body around in a rather twisted pattern.
"Now what is it doing?"
The dragon's body was pulsating at a rapid pace as though it was about to burst or something, but instead the back of its tail suddenly became engulfed in flames. This proceeded across its entire body before Volvagia was completely consumed by its own flames, leaving it nothing more than a burnt head attached to a skeletal body.
Why did it have to go and do that? I mean, I know it's defeated and all, but couldn't it have just burned away or something instead of literally burning itself alive?"
Before I could continue, Volvagia's skeletal remains fell apart and scattered all across the platform, and falling into the lava before its head crashed down next to me, which felt really creepy. It barely opened its eyes and let out one final scream before it burned away, leaving behind a giant heart.
"You did it!"
exclaimed Spike.
"Even though I do feel bad that it ended up burning itself to death, I wish that I didn't have to see that, as it was clearly disgusting. In any case, the dragon has been destroyed, and the megaton hammer has fulfilled its purpose just like it had done a long time ago by the Goron hero who forged it,"
I said.
"Why don't you pick up that heart container to fully recover from your ordeal, and then we can step into the blue light like before and go back to the Chamber of Sages and meet the sage that we have awakened?"
said Spike. As I picked up the heart container, I felt the warm feeling inside of me as I became even stronger, and when I stepped into the light and the prism surrounded me, I knew who I was going to meet as the sage, because it was now obvious as to who it was. When I arrived back at the chamber, I was placed down on the Triforce symbol in front of the red raised groove which indicated fire, and as I suspected, Pinkie Pie rose from it with a huge smile across her face.
Thank you, brother. I really appreciate what you did. I thank you on behalf of the entire Goron race. You turned out to be a real hero, just as I thought you would. I was wise to have named my daughter after you because of the heroics you performed long ago. However, I can see that you have a concern on your face, and I suspect that it has to do with something important?
Asked Pinkie Pie.
It has to do with what you and your sister didn't tell me,
I replied.
So my sister ended up letting you know about my problem?
Asked Pinkie Pie.
No, I was able to figure it out on my own without her saying a word, but I will admit that what she said to me did allow me to get clued in on what happened. To be honest, you don't really know me as well as you think if you believed that. Darunia. No. Pinkie Pie. The loss of your people must have been so unbearable for you, and it drove you to want to do whatever you had to in order to destroy the dragon, and defy Ganondorf in the process.
I replied.
My heart was filled with so much rage that I wanted to take my aggression out on something,
said Pinkie Pie.
And the dragon was the first thing that came to mind, right?
I asked.
When I was attempting to contain the dragon and distract it long enough for you to arrive, I didn't care what happened to me so long as I was able to fulfill my desire of revenge for my fallen brothers, but then the image of my daughter appeared in my head, and I came to realize that I had once again allowed my anger to blind me just like it had done so before during the famine. My daughter would never forgive me for wanting to throw away my life so recklessly, so I decided to let Volvagia do whatever it wished. At that moment, I was at peace with myself when everything went black, and for a while I thought that I had died, yet somehow I ended up here of all places.
Replied Pinkie Pie.
You could say that she was the true hero,
I said.
On an emotional level, yes, but you are the true hero for what you have done.
By the way, the wild Darunia, turned out to be the great sage of fire. No, wait. I liked the name you said when you were scolding me. What did you say it was? Pinkie Pie? For some reason, that name sounds right to me, especially since I am now here in this place, and it does match with my overall complexion.
Isn't that funny, brother? Well, this must be what they call destiny. Nothing has made me happier than helping you seal the evil here. I know that I can't return to my dear Sunset Shimmer, my wonderful older sister, and the rest of my people, but I trust that you will tell them of my fate?
Asked Pinkie Pie.
You have my word,
I smiled.
Knowing that makes me at peace with myself, knowing that I was able to pull back from the brink of madness in time. Hey, brother, take this. This is a medallion that contains the power of the fire spirits, and my friendship,
said Pinkie Pie. She then raised her arms up, and from above a red medallion fell down, where it stopped just above my head, where I reached out with my hands to claim it. As I held the medallion in my hands, I felt a strong surge of power coursing through me. Could this be the power that Pinkie Pie has been using since the very beginning? Also, since she has taken a liking to the name by which I know her, could she have accepted the equestrian magic inside of her? This was something I had to know, and now was the only time I could ask her about it.
That there is the fire medallion which you have now received, Sunset Shimmer. I have awakened as one of the 6 sages, and added my power to yours, which means the time has come to me to say goodbye, as you must return to Hyrule and continue your journey. Not yet,
I shouted.
What's wrong?
Asked Pinkie Pie.
Did you manage to accept the story which I told you long ago about where I came from? I know it's awfully sudden of me to mention it to you now just as I am about to go back to Hyrule, but you must tell me what you decided regarding that.
I replied.
About you coming from another world?
Asked Pinkie Pie.
Yes,
I replied.
Oh, I figured out you were telling me the truth after you left Goron City 7 years ago,
said Pinkie Pie.
What?
I asked.
It just came to me because your story was funny and full of excitement, so why would I not believe you are from a world inhabited by ponies? Anyway, I want you to remember something. Now you and I are true brothers,
replied Pinkie Pie. I should have known that her zaniness and ability to flat out ignore reality would be the reason she was able to believe me, even though it didn't make all that much sense in the given context. As I took my leave of the Chamber of the Sages to return hopefully to the Death Mountain crater, something was taking place back at Kakariko Village which related to what was happening on Death Mountain itself.
Anju, what are you doing? I'm looking up at Death Mountain,
replied Scootaloo.
Why would you be wanting to look up at the peak? We all know what Talon said before she left to go back to Lon Lon Ranch. The mountain is dangerous to travel up these days because of the boulders rolling down the trails, the disappearance of the Gorons, and that ring of fire above the peak which has been there for roughly 7 years now. I say forget about it and look after those cuckoos of yours as they could do with some cheering up. I know what she said about the problems happening up there, but there is one problem she didn't anticipate,
said Scootaloo.
And what would that be? For years we were told by the Gorons whenever they came down here to the village that Death Mountain was an active volcano, yet most of us never believed them seeing as it has never erupted, at least according to what the history books say. I think we should have paid more attention to what they were saying as something strange is happening at the peak. It looks like the mountain is about to blow,
replied Scootaloo.
You've been working too hard if you believe. Whoa. You're right. It's been like that for a couple of minutes now, as though something happened deep inside of the crater which has caused some kind of chain reaction. I'd say that the mountain is going to gusher up something which will look amazing down here from where we're standing, but I'd hate to think of anyone being caught inside of the crater when the eruption is about to occur,
said Scootaloo.
What if someone was in there when it happens? They'll most likely be roasted alive, or die from overexposure to the heat, or something much worse than that. You know, that Sunset Shimmer left for the mountain about a day ago saying that she was going to figure out what happened to the Gorons. You don't suppose she ended up going into the Death Mountain crater, do you? If she did and she's still in there, we'd best make arrangements for a funeral, as her chances of surviving an eruption that close to the epicenter is impossible,
replied Scootaloo. A loud boom reverberated across the region as Death Mountain erupted, spewing out lava from the peak, which was an impressive sight to see, yet what was more interesting was that the dark clouds were pulled into the eruption along with the ring of fire. This was followed by another booming sound before the sky became a bright blue, and the ring of fire had become the ring of smoke it used to be, signaling that the mountain had returned to normal.
Better inform the Gorons that they need to go into the crater in order to find a deceased person before it ends up decaying, and can no longer be buried. That poor girl. She never stood a chance in that eruption,
cried Scootaloo. To be continued. Chapter 30, Finishing up Loose Ends.